we're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's March 20th here in Seoul. I'm Shin Yun, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Arirang.
Happy Monday, everyone.
Happy Monday! And Walter Lee.
Lovely to be here.
Now, both are here to speak on behalf of those in their 20s and 30s. Now, we're going to start with the news feed as usual. Every day, we make a news feed that covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. The first hashtag is paternity leave. Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida on Friday said the country would implement necessary measures to allow 85% of male workers who have children to take paternity leave by the year 2030. Now, this is a big jump from what the country saw in 2021. Only around 14% of men took paternity leave, and the Prime Minister vowed to do this to reverse the country's plummeting birth rate. Japan aims to use the next 6 to 7 years to reverse its declining birth trend. Now, the second hashtag is Trump. The former U.S. President Donald Trump went on social media on Saturday saying he expects to be arrested on Tuesday over allegedly paying hush money to a porn star before the 2016 presidential election. In the same social media post, Trump urged his supporters to launch mass protests, but his lawyer said there had been no communication from law enforcement yet, and if Trump is indicted, though, he would become the first former president in the states to ever face criminal charges. Now, the third hashtag is pension reform, referring to France's directive to raise the pension age by 2 years to 64 without a parliamentary vote. Despite nationwide protests and political unrest, President Emmanuel Macron has been pushing for this type of reform, saying it's essential to ensure there's no deficit. Another backup to his claim is that France will now be in line with its European neighbors, where the legal retirement age is typically higher. But many who hit the streets over the weekend claimed that the changes were unfair for people who started working at a young age, especially in physically tough jobs, and for women who had career breaks to raise children. Now, why don't we take a deeper look at the first hashtag, paternity leave? Japan's vision to boost paternal leave benefits to more workers came amid the country seeing the number of babies born last year falling below 800,000 for the first time since records began. But Japan isn't the only country with rapidly dropping birth rates. Korea has had the lowest fertility rate in the world since 2013. And we've also seen a low percentage of people actually enjoying paternal leave benefits. A survey done on 1,000 workers found that as of last year, 1 out of 3 said they couldn't use their paternity or maternity leave, especially women. Half of the women surveyed said they couldn't take leave, and experts analyzed this was because companies still seem to prefer workers who don't take any leave during their career. Though they're prohibited by law from penalizing employees who do use paternity leave, companies are often found giving more opportunities or benefits to employees that don't. Now, here in the studio, what do you guys think about Korea's paternity leave culture?
Okay, so I've obviously got a very big opinion of this as a recent father, and what I have to say is I really support this paternity leave because I'm trying to be involved in my daughter's life as much as possible, but obviously I need to work. I mean, it's a little bit different. I'm a freelancer. I won't be able to benefit from this, but I understand the move behind it. Now, I have to give props to women of 30, 40 years ago who traditionally was to stay at home and raise a kid by themselves. Now, I'm trying to be as much involved in my child's upbringing as possible. So that's two parents trying their best to look after a very small child. And we're both exhausted. So I really think having two parents there is very beneficial for the child's future.
And it's very necessary, and that's why Japan has been trying to encourage this, to encourage more people from having birth. And Cheska, do you think a better work-life balance could equate to higher fertility rates?
Absolutely, because I mean, Walter brought up a very good testimonial. But remember in our birth rate episode, we talked about it takes a village to raise a child.
Right.
So not just two parents, but an entire village to raise a small baby. So having both parents to raise a baby should not be a preferred option, but it really should be a must for both the parents and the baby itself. And I think a better work-life balance in respect to, securing individuals, happiness and mental health would definitely promote more fertility and birth rate in our country.
Definitely, and seeing a better work-life balance and respect as an individual is definitely something we want to see, especially as we're younger, driving forces of the workplace. And that was our news feed for this Monday. And speaking of better work policies. Recently, the government has proposed a new overtime policy here in Korea, and it's actually not getting as much support as officials had hoped for. But take a look at the screen to find out more. Here in Korea, one proposed work hour policy reform has been drawing so much controversy that the president has asked officials to hear what millennials and Gen Z have to say before further adjustments are made. It's extending maximum overtime at companies from 52 hours per week to 69. The government says it aims to make the lives of employers and workers easier by allowing them to allocate their work more efficiently. This way, employees could do overtime at the busiest times and then use their paid days off consecutively so they can have a longer vacation. However, lots of people are against this reform, saying it would increase health risks from overtime. It also promotes even harder working conditions and goes against the global trend of improving people's work-life balance. Today, News Gen looks at 3 questions. 1. How are millennials, Gen Z reacting to this reform? 2. What are they demanding instead? 3. How have other countries reformed their labor policies? A 69-hour work week. As we just saw in our video, this proposal has drawn much controversy, with many pointing out how South Koreans already work more than many of their overseas counterparts. There's even a term in Korean called kwadosa, referring to a sudden death caused by overwork. So Cheska, first explain to us how this reform came to surface and where we're heading now.
Right, so the new reform is actually stating that it will allow for up to 69 hours a week, so that's over a span of 7 days, as opposed to what we currently have, which is 52 hours over the 5 days. Now, the government's intention for the reform was to allow for more flexibility of working hours so that they can use it for the crunch time and then take more days off whenever needed.
Right.
However, this was met with obviously very vociferous oppositions from the millennials and Gen Z that are actually in the workforce, although the intention was to address labor shortage as well as low fertility and birth rate, as we mentioned.
And that's why officials are even considering scrapping the whole reform because of such heated public concern. Last week, the president reportedly said that work weeks longer than 60 hours just seems to be unrealistic and impossible. So why do you guys think it has drawn so much controversy, and what are the main arguments out there, Walter?
Well, let me talk on behalf of the millennials who think this is silly, because I think it is. Listen, we had the 52-hour change, and I don't think that worked at all. I think a lot of people were still working more than the 52 hours, not getting paid, not getting their benefits. I know big companies, though they might say that they, pay their employees overtime. I know in many cases I've got friends, believe it or not, who work long hours or take work home, and you're not going to get paid for that work at home.
Exactly.
Now, increasing it to 69 hours, I know that, like we said, it was over maybe 7 days. However, that might entice, let's say, employers for their employees to work a little bit harder, take on more workload, and even then still take work home. So when are we supposed to rest? We are human beings. We need to sleep.
Your anger has filled the studio.
And I'm not even a full-time worker.
So on the studio tour, we have representative from the Labour Party of the Millennials.
But Cheska, what are some other main arguments out there?
So not as vociferous as Walter, but I do represent some of our generation. Some people have definitely voiced concerns about the guarantee for extra time off when needed.
Right.
So even though the government intends to allow for more flexibility, the reform, there is neither mandate nor enforcement on when or how they can take these extra hours off when needed. As Walter mentioned, even with this 52 hours a week, a lot of my employees, a lot of my friends even have to tread very softly when asking for vacations or days off. So, and when it comes to the so-called company peak times or crunch time, everyone is expected to work over hours without the guarantee of compensation or times off. So will the 69-hour even guarantee this?
Right, exactly. And another popular argument is that it seems to be going against the global trend of reducing hours at the workplace. So what are some labor policies or recent reforms made by other countries?
So I'll give an example. I have worked in 2 different countries, both here in South Korea and Australia. But look, I worked in Australia maybe 10 years ago, and even then, the working hours were quite strict. I mean, this is going back a decade ago. Now, at the time, and I still think to this day, it was a 38-hour week. Now, in Australia, if you work overtime, you do get paid for it. It's a legal obligation by the companies to pay you for it. It's usually double time.
Right.
So actually, in many cases, people wanted to work overtime
Exactly,
because they wanted to
exactly.
get that extra money. But companies didn't want to pay you, so they sent you out that door really, really quickly. Same with weekends. You get benefits over the weekends as well.
And holidays as well if you work.
Holidays
yeah.
as well. You can also refuse to do overtime. You don't have
Right.
that social pressure of, oh, I need to work. Now, also, full-time and part-time employees do get holiday pay as well, something that we feel, like you mentioned before, a little pressured to take, especially for long periods of time. Now, recently, there has been talk by a new Senate committee report recommending the 38-hour working time be reviewed, hinting at a possible 4-day work week.
A 4-day work week. That is definitely a popular opinion among millennials and youngsters here in Korea. But also, as you mentioned, that being paid overly to work during like rest days, I think that's also something that brought officials to consider the 69-hour work week because the 52 hours for some people, depending on industry, wasn't enough, right?
Exactly.
But Cheska, would you like to add on to any other labor policies or reforms we've seen by other countries?
Absolutely, and I love that you mentioned it varies from industry to industry because my own experience, I worked at a finance in the States and the hours were actually over the top.
Right.
However, it was met with very lucrative compensation and proper vacation time.
Awesome.
So generally, the hours are very flexible, as Walter mentioned, in Europe and in United States, especially in terms of like vacations and maternity leave. But let's take a look at the actual numbers published by the OECD to see how far Korea has come. Now, as of 2021, the OECD average working hours was 16 hours, and South Korea ranks the highest fifth with 1915 hours.
Wow, 1,915 hours.
Exactly, and get this, according to the article, this is actually a figure achieved from a 10% drop from 2011, so 10 years ago when Walter was working in Australia.
Yes.
And back then, Korea ranked first among OECD countries with 2,136 hours. And there's even, as Yeo mentioned, university coined term 과로사, which literally means death from overwork. And in a country as competitive and highly educated as Korea, it's quite difficult not to get swept by the culture, even if you don't believe in it.
Definitely. Then what are the younger generation wanting to see in the workplace? What's the ideal amount of hours they're proposing?
Well, we've discussed this on the show that the MZ generation are the ones who want to do more leisure activities. They want to do self-development. They want to work on themselves more. So obviously, they're wanting less hours to work. If we're going to increase it, how are we supposed to spend time with our friends and family?
Exactly.
So the maximum amount of time, well, on a survey done by the Korea Institute for Health and Social Affairs, the average was around 36.7 hours max. So that's a little less than Australia. I mean, some people might call it laziness, but I think it's a great number.
And I also saw this survey and I realized that the younger the surveyors were, the less they wanted to actually work.
Right. It seems to make a little sense that, yes, the younger, we want to spend more time for ourselves these days.
We want quality
We
time.
want quality time.
And Cheska, very briefly, what are other people saying about this? What's the ideal work hour and work environment they're proposing?
Yes, and I also want to bring up that it's probably not just about the hours, but also the quality of working hours. There was a very interesting social experiment done in UK over the span of 6 months with 61 companies actually implementing the 4-day week. And it was added with the social welfare benefits of workshop and counseling. And the end result was better sleeping quality, less stress, and get this, an average increase of 1.4% in company profit, as opposed to what people might think that decreased working hours would lead to a decrease in profit.
Right, so it all comes down to quality work hours rather than the quantity.
Definitely.
And we're now going to include an expert in our discussion to find out what millennials and Gen Z around the world think are the most ideal work hours and work environment these days. So, a growing number of countries seem to be bringing down work hours and changing in-person attendance at the office to working from home, and that's to meet with the growing demands of their younger workforce, Millennials and Gen Z. So, we have with us connected through Skype an assistant professor of communication who will explain to us what the young workers in the States have been advocating for their workplaces. It's Dr. Marlon Twyman. Great to have you with us, Doctor.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Loving the discussion so far. It looks like we're all aligned on a lot of issues.
All right, Dr. Twyman, so South Korea is notorious for its overworking culture. So are many of its neighboring Asian countries like China with its notorious 996 culture, meaning you work 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week, and Japan's karoshi tendency, also similar to Korea's kwarosa. So why do you think overworking has developed into its unique culture here?
You know, from the United States point of view, and having worked with a number of colleagues from all of the aforementioned countries, two things that I've noticed, one coming from the individual perspective, and it's like you all touched upon, that how do you deal with pressure being in highly competitive environments? Well, you control what you can control. And the one thing a lot of us can't control is the amount of time, the amount of effort we're putting into any activity, right? And so when you are surrounded by people where there is that perception that everyone is good, everyone is motivated, what's one thing you can do to give yourself the best possible chance for success? Putting in hours, just putting in time to compete. The other side of it, when we think about culturally or organizationally even, not even at a broad societal level, understanding what is the most important resource that an organization has is people. And a lot of organizations, a lot of large groups, they want their best people working on the hardest work, the most important work, instead of having shifts or rotations where the quality of people might drop off. And so that statistic you all shared with productivity or profits going up 1.4%, that's very encouraging to hear. But do keep in mind, a lot of companies are trying to increase profit by having their best people always on. And they're really, really nervous about that drop off that could come when they're, off work or on vacation.
I see. And Cheska, do you have any questions for Dr. Twyman?
So what do you think about Korea's proposed 69-hour per week labor policy, and how is it different from other countries and their way of securing a better work-life balance?
So in all fairness, I do appreciate the level of transparency in the policy, right? Because as you all mentioned, there's a lot of unspoken expectations and norms that could arise. And just speaking from the United States perspective, for a lot of professional white-collar office work, a lot of us are salary employee, where we're paid on a 40-hour schedule. However, as you mentioned, with respect to finance industry, that's one example where you're expected, or the norm is, to spend much more than 40 hours. And while your per hour compensation may be high, it often does not reflect the amount of time you actually spend. But I will just say, in my view, the policy does at least allow for a discussion to happen. And that's what's important, where employers and the people themselves, the workers, they can come together and really start to have a dialogue about what kind of work is meaningful, what kind of activities people want to be spending their best working hours on, and how that workplace can be designed to help make this as accommodating as possible in various ways.
Yes, and the president asked officials to hear from more millennials and Gen Z, and how is this how this policy should go? How would you want to see the overall work culture change in, let's say, South Korea? I mean, the United States is known for better work-life balance. Any tips we can learn from you in the work culture there?
You know, the main distinction that I've observed is really just giving the workers themselves that freedom and that agency to really find the work task and the activities that work for them. So as you all mentioned in the earlier discussion, letting younger people in particular who are saying, hey, we want skill development, we want to be able to do other activities. Well, if there are ways that you can integrate that into their work experience, their organizational experience, now it makes sense. So for example, I at different parts of my career have definitely spent over 60 hours a week working on different activities. But that time was a combination of me being very productive on getting things delivered, as well as skill development where I'm helping out or getting apprenticeship kind of model training. And it's all happening at different career phases. And so helping the worker actually do meaningful work where they're aligned to not only the goals of a broader organization or group, but also aligned to the vision that they set out for their future. Because a lot of us in competitive environments, we have these goals, we have these ideas about reaching certain benchmarks, certain milestones, certain titles in a certain timeline. However, 69 hours is a huge commitment. There are sacrifices that will be made. If you're going to ask the worker to do that, make sure they're sacrificing so that they can ultimately be in a position as a person and not just a worker where they can be happy 15 years down the road, because they will be very good at something. But let's make sure that they can be good at the things that they actually
appreciate them as a person rather than a worker. Thank you so much, Dr. Twyman. Those were very insightful points you just made.
Hey, that's why I'm here. Glad to give that encouragement.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we're going to include our viewers in our discussion, so we're going to hear what they had to say about our discussion topic. So we asked what kind of work week they want to do and want to see in their near future. So take a look at the screen. Pringles A said, I work from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Monday to Friday. I support the 4-day work week plan as it allows us to take care of anything that requires a visit to government or bank offices. Steph Manfredi said, I work 3 days and he works at an automotive parts store in Canada for 5 years now, but he supports the 4-day work week. Alexander Carrico said, as a U.S. public school teacher, I worked 8 hours a day and an additional 4 hours for school. I worked all day 1 weekend day planning lessons and prepping, and this destroyed my relationship with my teenage children who resented those long work days for many years. And every day we do upload questions related to our discussion topic for our viewers to answer. If you want to participate, please search ArirangNews on YouTube. Look into our community tab. The link is right below. Now let's quickly end off our discussion for today. It's been such a heated discussion to see exactly where the 69-hour per week policy will go. So any last thoughts, Cheska?
So as Dr. Whiteman said, people are the most important resources, so we should definitely include them in the discussion about the parties that are actually being affected, and also always quality over quantity.
Quality over quantity, and we'll definitely have to see how work weeks will roll out here in Korea. Hopefully our discussion today will become one of the many voices the government refers to when making changes to their policy. Now we'll be here every day from 9:30 a.m. to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you the topics that young people are talking about. Special thanks to Cheska Dainha.
Pleasure's always mine, thank you.
And Walter Lee.
Lovely to be here.
Thank you everyone for watching. We are
News Generation.